Hey everyone, it's Samara and I'm here with a design team project for paper issues. I'm going to first start out with this wonderful cut file called Rainbow Spotting on a Cloudy Day. Before I get started, I'm going to test out a couple of inks, and I actually decided to use the first one, which ends up being Speckled Egg. And I'm just using a brush and this Pink Fresh Studios Cloud Builder template to stencil in some amazing clouds. This is a little bit tedious, but the results are so much fun. This has definitely become one of my most favorite stencils. You'll notice some areas that I do go back over the top so that I don't have a whole lot of stark white on this page. I'm going to be filling up this entire page full of color. And each time I just move the stencil just a little bit offset from the previous placement, and that's so that the clouds build up on one another and it's not perfectly lined up. At the bottom, you have to be a little bit careful because you don't have a whole lot of places to hold on to anymore, so the stencil will slip off a little bit. I am going to be using this fabulous new line called Buenos from Obed Marshall, who's designing for American Crafts. And I like to use the leftover pieces from my cut file to help trace my trace a template to cut out from, so I can ensure that this is going to fit perfectly. I'm using fine line red top glue here, and I just go ahead and place those cut files that I've cut out. I shouldn't say cut file, but you know, the cutting. And I just keep doing this, and I test out a lot of colors just to make sure that it is indeed the color that I want to use. So you'll see me auditioning some papers and try to figure out where I'm going to use those. This process can take a considerable amount of time, but the results are just stunning. Here I am flipping through my paper pad, just trying to see which color I want to use next, and it's definitely going to be that green because, you know, hello, RG Biv. And I'm going to finish off this rainbow with that pink again. So let's go ahead and drop that in there. All right, so that's looking pretty phenomenal. So my next step is to cover the all of that detail area, the hearts and the dots. And what I used here was my previous stencils, and I essentially made a new stencil to cut out that middle section there. I could have just glued the whole thing to one background, but you know, I had to be a little, or maybe a lot extra. So just piecing that in there. And I decide to use just some of the, what do you call that? Some of the yellow orange and some of the blue papers to layer in and fill in that section back there, those details. So still looking for more paper to decide if I want to add any additional, introduce any additional papers. And I think maybe I want to use this one, but I realize it's just a little bit too bold. I end up going back to that pale yellow, and again with that a little bit of a darker yellow yellow orange. I do add some of the glue in between the dots so that it doesn't lift up anywhere. All right. And something I also like to do is adhere my cut files down with washi tape that I wouldn't normally use on a project. So that just ensures that my cut files, my backing is not going to go anywhere. All right, I'm grabbing some of the blue background paper to create my clouds. Something that you might have saw me do at the beginning was make a little mark on the front of each of the leftover pieces, and that makes sure that I know which is the top side so that I always put that down when I'm cutting a new template. You can see how easy it is to cut those out when you trace them with the black pen. It goes very, very quickly. And again, just using that washi tape to secure all those files into the background paper. The back is ugly, but look at this front. It's gorgeous. So I'm thinking that I actually want to stitch around my clouds. But first I'm going to check my picture, make sure that that is indeed where I want to leave my picture. And before I do that, I want to add some hearts to the clouds. So I punched out some of that pink paper and I just am adding those little hearts in there. And I'm going to mat my picture in that wavy blue paper that I've already used on the rainbow. I cut 3 sides using the perfect layers, and then I'm going to tear the bottom edge, which is like one of my most favorite things to do. I'm going to use some foam just to lift up my picture a little bit to add some dimension. And I just use my ATG to adhere that down. And here I'm going to be quickly going through the ephemera pack, and this is still from the Buenos collection. And I'm just making some really quick decisions as I go through this paper pack, or excuse me, ephemera pack. And I love tags, so I pull out some tags, I audition those in there, decide, yep, that one's staying. And I'm going to see if there are any other tags or things that I'd like to use. When I put my picture down, I did not press really hard, which is why I have the ability to slide these tags under there. So I'm still going through. I really like this saying, what fun. And I love frames. I love frames. So I'm going to use that little frame. And what else am I going to pull out of here? You know, one only knows. So there's a bunch of these little flowers in there. I love them. And I decide to pull out some flowers to add to that bottom corner. And I'm going to use some leftover paper to fill in my frame, and then just carefully trimming around that, and we'll slide that into place. I had to be careful to not completely cover the design on the frame with those flowers. I had a little bit of foam underneath the stain there so it doesn't get smashed down. I love this glue because it has that needle point tip, and you can really get under there into all the little tight spots. So sometimes I don't have all the ephemera that I'd like to use, so I just cut out some of the paper as well. And this is from one of the papers had some cut aparts. So I've cut out the little camera and the little bow tie. And I'm trying to decide where I want to use that little camera, and I decide all the way down at the bottom corner with another flower cluster. And where is that little bow tie going to go? Just adding a little tiny bit of foam so again it doesn't get smashed down, and adding that flower. The flower is going to go flat on the page, and then I'll use some foam to lift up the camera. So here I go ahead and adhere down those little hearts in the cloud. And this is one of those times where I really wish I hadn't used this wonderful glue to do this, because I end up changing my mind. Those hearts just did not offer enough contrast. I'm going to pull out some of my twine, and I end up choosing this bright blue, which matches the ephemera. So in the ephemera there is some really bold blue, and that's why I decided on this bold blue. So I go ahead and fill in those tags, and then I decide to add some of the string just in a very organic way to each of the clusters. And I do glue that down, just using the glue very sparingly, so that the glue does dry clear, but it definitely leaves a shiny texture that I don't want to be seen on my after project. Trim up those little tags, the string on those tags, I should say. All right, and I decide to add a little bit more string underneath the sentiment. And again, I want it to be kind of swooshy and just, add some movement to the page. My little spatula comes in handy all the time. I use that to kind of lift up anything that I have previously adhered down to the page. It works great for ATG, not so great for things that have been glued. Here I go through my alphabets, and I decide to use this Bella Boulevard Florence alphabet in the color of blueberry, because again, it matches that string and it matches some of the color, the bright blue in the ephemera. And I typically will build my titles backwards, because I know where it ends, and so I don't know. And I decide that I want it somewhat centered with the heart as the center, so I have to move things over a little bit to make that happen. And here I decide to lift up the glued hearts. And so when I did lift those up, because I used the actual glue, it did pick up some of the paper, but it wasn't enough to really write home about. And then I'm just substituting the pink hearts for these bright blue hearts from the Bella Boulevard alphabet. All right, and what you are not going to see, because it took me a ridiculous amount of time, is I decided to stitch around the clouds and the rainbow. So I just use my my paper piercer to add in the holes, and then I just use 3 strands from a 6-strand embroidery floss to stitch those in, just using a standard back stitch. This goes by pretty quickly for me. I usually put something on Netflix and just watch. So you can see here the completed stitching. And you'll notice that I used colors for each of the rainbows. So there's like a pink, a yellow, a green, and a blue. And then I'm just going in here with some enamel dots and just adding something shiny to the layout. And finally, I'm going to add in my date stamp. What's funny is I didn't even realize I was using the blue ink until I was putting the ink pad away. Normally I would use black. And I decided to use this pink paper, and I want a torn edge, so I just use that for my date. And we'll slide that right underneath the photo. So you can see here that the enamel dots just add a lot of dimension and texture to the layout. So thank you so much for sticking around with me as I created this layout. It sure was a lot of fun to create. And don't forget, coming up here at the end is my discount code. Feel free to use that for your next purchase.